Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a good day. Today I'm going to talk about the 1982 film E.T., the Extraterrestrial. It was a massive hit in the summer of 1982. It shattered box office records. It did more business than Star Wars, and has since become a classic. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the legacy of the film towards the end. But yeah, so this film, directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Melissa Matheson, starring Henry Thomas, Dee Wallace, Robert McNaughton, Drew Barrymore, Peter Coyote, the principals in the cast. A lot's been written about this movie, a lot's been said, and I don't know if I have much to add, but I'll talk about some aspects of the film, though. So what's interesting is the origins of E.T., where the genesis of the film, it started out as a much different type of movie. The working title was Night Skies, and it was going to be about a family in Kentucky being terrorized by aliens. And there was a subplot in that script, though, where the young boy in the family befriends one of the aliens, and that was, I guess, that kind of became the starting point for E.T. I know John Sayles wrote that original script for the film, and it's one of those interesting movies. I think the script is available online to find it, but would be interesting to think of what that movie would have looked like. But it became moved into a much different type of movie. Also, E.T. is very much a companion film to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If Close Encounters is a big epic about first contact with visitors from space, and E.T. is a very intimate story about not so much the universal ramifications of first contact. This just tells a very simple story with elements of morality, elements, even some religious readings can be made into this film as well. So it is interesting how the film moved from being more of a sci-fi thriller and has become more of a much more character-driven drama than we get. And I have this book on E.T., the Ultimate Visual History by Cassine Gaines, and it's a really detailed book on the making of E.T. and the legacy of E.T. So if you're a big fan of the film, I'd recommend this book. But the film does include some of the concepts. I think Rick Baker did these for what the aliens were going to look like for Night Skies, kind of having this grasshopper insect type look to them. But you can kind of see a little bit E.T., how we moved from this version of the visitor to E.T., of course. And but yeah, the film or the book has a lot of artwork and storyboarding of how the creature was eventually designed. Here's a picture of Carlo Rambaldi, who designed the E.T. puppet. Picture right there. And just a lot on, much like Empire Strikes Back, where you know, for the movie to work, you had to get the audience to buy into a character being a puppet, Yoda. And E.T. faced the same challenge, and I think it was never a problem for me. I don't know how modern audiences would necessarily read into it, but anyway. Yeah, you know, the film, and the opening in the film is really good. It's a silent movie for really the first 7 or 8 minutes, where we see the spaceship land, and we get this little mini adventure where one of the members of the crew, E.T., gets left behind, and we kind of learn that these visitors are botanists. We see the inside of their ship, and they're doing science experiments and things like that. So we get a little bit of mystery about the culture that E.T. is coming from. but a great job there of setting up the film. Then, of course, we meet the family. Famously playing Dungeons and Dragons, very iconic scene, and we meet Elliot, who is the middle child, his older brother Michael, his younger sister Gertie, and the family is going through a separation that we learn where the father famously has gone away to Mexico, has left his family, which is, very Spielberg thing. The absent father we see a lot throughout his work, and we get the sense like it's just kind of a sad, melancholy time for the family. Eventually, E.T. kind of is living near their property or whatever, and of course he and Elliot meet and become friends, and the story, that's the way the story goes, and just the how the film evokes childhood wonder. It's just one of the best films about childhood and the imagination, and Spielberg has talked a lot about having an imaginary friend, and when you feel like the world no longer makes sense or it has shut you out, it's such a great work of escapism in the movie with the moments with E.T. The voice of E.T. was done by many people, of course, and that's been so the look of E.T., the sound of E.T., it's very much there. The moments, as we learn that the government is searching for E.T., of course, and that situation comes to a head where E.T., of course, has to go back home, and he has to leave eventually, and it's really a story about bonding and connection, and then having to say goodbye, the story. And I think, the movie, it is a really simple story. I think emotionally, it's a very complex story about childhood, about the emotions of childhood and fear of separation and the longing for connection and all those things. It's a very powerful movie in terms of emotion. Is how it works, and the cast is great. I mean, these are some of the greatest child performances you'll ever see. Drew Barrymore, so young, but she's just fantastic as Gertie, and Henry Thomas as the Elliot, who is the middle child. The most he's full of imagination and is hurt by the family situation and is desperate to make a connection. And then Robert McNaughton as Michael is also, I think, really good in the film, where he's kind of in this position where he's the oldest and has to take on more responsibility and almost realizes he cannot replace his father, but he kind of has to take on that role a little bit. And Dee Wallace is great too. I mean, one of the iconic 80s moms, which she would, of course, in Cujo, she would play a mom, and also in The Howling and other films of the time, and she's great too. I think we get the sense of her trying to hold the family together. Her own fragile emotional state comes through, but at the same time realizes she has to remain strong and hold it together, and I think just like the fragility of the family here and how all of them in their own way are trying to keep it together is very moving. And E.T. as well, is his role in all this works perfectly too. So yeah, I mean, I think like the look of the film, the cinematography is great. Alan DeVoe, I'm hoping pronouncing his name right, did the cinematography, and it just the child level camera, where we're always kind of at the camera's usually 3-4 feet off the ground, so we kind of have that child's view of everything, and in E.T., and that's great. And just the lighting in the film really works. I know they tried to match the time of day with what's happening in the house, so when it feels like it's morning outside, it's morning, or if it's that day, or if it's evening or night, just how just the whole set design of the house, and it really feels lived in and real. And I think that's really critical to how the story works in the film. And I should mention too, like Melissa Matheson wrote the script, and I think it was when Spielberg was filming Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Melissa Matheson and him were bouncing ideas off each other of how to revise this original story about the dark skies, and kind of making this into more of a character drama, intimate character drama. So that's, and the script is great. I think it's just I think a lot of improvisation was allowed with the kids, and there was just a lot of collaboration going on during the making of the film. And I mean, it's such a 1980s touchstone. It's the nostalgia is heavy with this movie, especially for anyone who was saw this film when they were a child. I think I saw it for the first time in the theater in 1985. I want to say, when I was very young, 5 or 6 years old, but I remember seeing it in a theater, and probably on a re-release. And yeah, it's just I think the relationship between this movie and children is quite incredible in there. And the music by John Williams is one of his best scores, especially in the last 15-20 minutes of the film, when they're trying to escape and get E.T. to the landing area. And it's just incredible filmmaking, very visceral, very kinetic, and the music is, like I said, some of the best ever composed in that Williams, Spielberg, and there are many collaborations that they've had. But back to the 80s idea, it is very evocative of, I think, the idea of the 80s of consumerism, with all the toys that Elliot has, all the Star Wars, and all the posters on the wall, like Elvis Costello. And it's such a the movie is almost about pop culture and consumerism, and how that was shaping the identity of young people. It's not a big theme in the movie, of course, but it's there, I think, interestingly enough, in the background, and done in this really gentle way, which really works. Video games as well, all this of the 80s, and I think just the charm too of it being still in this analog world of landline telephones, and the old school TVs, the big box in the middle of the room, and all that. Like I said, the nostalgia is powerful with E.T. and all that. So I think too, like, I don't know how audiences, talking about the films in 1982, or like films like The Thing and The Blade Runner, which did not do as well at the box office at the time, but in the 40 plus years since, I think those are more of the movies people go to, The Thing or Blade Runner, which felt, they're darker, they're edgier, and they seem to be a little bit more in tune with what audiences want these days. And I don't know how E.T., I don't know, in the fact the aging in the film, where maybe, and I think Spielberg himself said this, where audiences might find the theme of connection and friendship in the film to be a little too hopeful, or maybe even a little too preachy. I don't know. Maybe that goes with the political climate these days, where the idea of making connections with people who aren't like you, or different culture. I don't know, like, some audiences might find this movie either too naive, or even propaganda or something, about, yeah. So I don't know how it would play today. I know I went to see it, I think, for the 40th anniversary. This would have been or 45th anniversary. It was a few years ago. I think 2018 or around that time, or maybe it was, trying to think, maybe it was like 2022 or something. And I remember going to the theater to see it, and there weren't many people in the theater. There was only like maybe 5 or 6 people at an IMAX screening for E.T. So whether that's anecdotal, but I don't know what it means. I mean, my own relationship with the film, I think you really like it when you're a kid. I think especially in that age, like from ages like 6 to 11 maybe, is the perfect age for this movie. You get older, you become a teenager, you want to get into more darker, edgier stuff, and E.T. starts to feel passe really, really fast, I think, as you're getting older. But I think as you get in your 30s, and I think in the 30s is when I think you start to be nostalgic about your childhood, or the first stirrings of nostalgia arrive, and you might go back and watch E.T. and see it through new eyes, whether you have a family, don't have a family at that time in your life, but it does kind of make you look at childhood through a different lens, through the adult lens, and so I think that's some of the magic of E.T., where it's great for children, but it's good for adults, I think, to watch and reflect on childhood, and maybe get back in touch with your childhood a little bit. And I know that's often a big criticism of Spielberg, is that he would, I think the word would use, like, infantilize audiences, and the Peter Pan syndrome and all that, where his kind of return to childhood, that fixation in his early films was not good for the culture. I don't really agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I think it's healthy to have films that take a real serious look at childhood, and get into the complex emotions of it, and get into some serious issues, because this is, I know we think of The Thing and all these other much more intense movies, but there's some really intense stuff in E.T. I mean, when we see E.T. in the ditch and he's looking terrible, I mean, that's upsetting. The whole, when he's being revived, when he's, when the doctors are trying to revive E.T. and he dies, and that is, comes back to life, of course, but I mean, that's very intense, there is something really intense about the movie. So even though we're not getting a bunch of gore and things like that, I think, like, going back to emotionally, it's a really complex movie, and a movie that really, I think, can get to a part of you that's often not activated when watching a movie. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot more to E.T. I think if you've not watched the film in a long time, I would suggest to give it another try and see how you react to it. But I always, I always get wrapped up in it every time I watch it, and I think there's a lot there. So so just some thoughts on E.T., a little bit on the legacy of E.T., and where the film stands today. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.